Chapter 1. Dido's Modular Mind legend tells of Queen Dido, who fled from Tyre. But let's put aside the myths and look at it through the eyes of an engineer. A group of colonists lands on the shores of modern-day Tunisia. They have nothing except what the ships brought. How to survive in a foreign land? The answer lay in their shipbuilding technology. The Phoenicians were the first to invent modular design. Imagine that. The year 800 BC. And they already have assembly lines. Each plank of Lebanese cedar. Every plank of the hull had a symbol carved into it, a letter of the alphabet, or a number. If a Carthaginian ship crashed on the rocks of Sicily, the carpenter didn't have to fit the parts by eye. He ordered the part from the central arsenal, and it fit into the slots perfectly, with millimeter precision. It was standardization, which Europe would not achieve again until the Napoleonic era. It was this interchangeability of parts that allowed them to dominate. While the Greeks built each ship as a unique work of art, the Carthaginians mass-produced them like factory goods. But there was another detail that is rarely mentioned. The Phoenicians were the first to use lead sheets to cover the underwater part of the hull. Thin plates were attached over the wood and protected it from shipworms, which could turn a sturdy ship into dust in a single season. It was the first anti-corrosion material in history, used in shipbuilding. Imagine what this meant in practice. A Greek merchant replaced his ship every 5 to 7 years. A Carthaginian merchant ship lasted 20 years. This was not just a matter of economy. It was a competitive advantage that could not be overcome without the same technology. Chapter 2. Geography as a sentence. Dido did not choose the location for her city because of the beauty of the sunsets. She found a point where the Mediterranean Sea narrows. Carthage sat on this strait, like a castle on a chain. Look at a map of the time. All the trade routes from Gibraltar to Egypt, from Italy to Africa, converged here. The Carthaginians did not just trade. They created the world's first information network. Their merchant ships were also reconnaissance vessels. They gathered data on currents, on tin prices in Britain, on silver deposits in Spain. They turned geography into capital. But to manage that capital, they needed a new operating system, and they created it, the alphabet. While the Egyptians were drawing complex hieroglyphics, and the Babylonians were squeezing out cuneiform, the Phoenicians reduced everything to 22 characters. Why? For speed, for accounting, so that a ship's captain could compile a cargo list in 5 minutes, that an official in a harbor 1,000 miles away could understand. It was civilization's first digital code. And here's what's striking. This alphabet that you are reading right now, which forms the basis of Greek, Latin, and Cyrillic writing, was not created for poetry, not for prayers. It was created for invoices, for bills, for the logistics of a trading empire. Beauty came later. First came accounting. The Carthaginians were also the first to systematically map coastlines. Their pilot books, handwritten descriptions of shores with details of depths, currents, and dangerous reefs, were passed from captain to captain as the greatest treasure. Some of these routes were kept so secret that captains were ordered to sink their ships if they were in danger of being captured. Anything to keep the maps from falling into the hands of competitors. Chapter 3. Cothon, a heart of stone and copper. If you flew over Carthage during its heyday, your attention would be drawn to Cothon. It is not just a port. It is the crown jewel of ancient engineering. The outer harbor was for merchants, noisy, smelling of spices and tar. But behind it lay the inner harbor, a perfectly circular military harbor. At its center was an island with the admiral's residence. 220 docks were located around the perimeter of the circle. But look closely at the details. These were not just sheds. They were mechanized slipways. Ships were pulled inside along wooden guides using capstans, huge winches, which were set in motion by teams of workers working in strict rhythm. Each slipway was designed for a specific type of vessel. A trireme could not fit into a slot for a quinquereme. It was the first system in history where infrastructure was designed for standardized equipment, not the other way around. Each dock was separated by ionic columns, creating a facade resembling an endless temple. But inside this temple, work was in full swing. No one prayed here. Here, they replaced the plating, caulked the seams, and cast bronze rams. The Carthaginians invented the dry dock in its prototype form. They could lift their entire fleet out of the water for maintenance in a single night. This gave them an incredible advantage. Their ships were always clean, fast, and did not rot. Meanwhile, enemy ships became encrusted with barnacles and lost speed. But the most remarkable thing was the fresh water system inside the harbor. The Carthaginians dug underground channels that supplied fresh water directly to the docks. This allowed them to wash the salt off the hulls of their ships after each voyage. A simple solution that doubled the life of a wooden hull. And no one in the ancient world, except them, had thought of it before. Chapter 4. Logistics of an Invisible Empire. How do you feed a city of 500,000 people in arid Africa? The Romans would later rely on the brute force of slaves. The Carthaginians relied on agricultural engineering. They created a system of terraces and irrigation that turned the desert into a garden. They were the first to use a scientific approach to agriculture. Mago, a Carthaginian scientist, wrote 28 volumes on agriculture. When Rome finally destroyed the city, the Senate ordered these books to be translated into Latin. It was the only thing they considered more valuable than gold. Mago described crop rotation 400 years before Roman agronomists began to think about it. He wrote about alternating legumes and grains to prevent soil depletion. He wrote about determining soil acidity by color and smell. He wrote about building terraces on hillsides so that rainwater would be absorbed into the ground rather than flowing into the sea. The Carthaginians invented industrial winemaking and olive oil production. They used screw presses, which tripled the yield compared to traditional methods. They didn't just sell oil, they sold the technology to produce it. Their warehouses were organized according to the principle of strict accountability. Archaeologists find the remains of amphorae marked with the date of bottling and the region. It was the world's first quality control system. If wine from Spain turned out to be sour, the code on the neck of the bottle was used to find the specific supplier, and they were excluded from the network. The Carthaginians also developed a double-entry system for commercial transactions. Each transaction was recorded in 2 documents. One remained with the ship's captain. The second, with an official in the harbor. This made it possible to control trade over thousands of kilometers without relying on the honesty of individuals. The system, which we now call double-entry bookkeeping, was not invented by Italian bankers during the Renaissance. Its prototype existed in Carthage 1,000 years before the Medici. Chapter 5. Purple, Tin, and the Silence of the Ocean. Carthage's trading network extended far beyond the Mediterranean. Their ships sailed around Africa, reaching the shores of modern-day Senegal and Nigeria. They traded with peoples whose existence Rome did not even suspect. But the most closely guarded secret was the route to the north, to the Tin Islands, to what we now call Britain and Cornwall. Tin was the strategic metal of antiquity. Without it, there was no bronze. Without bronze, there were no weapons. The Carthaginians controlled this route and carefully hid it from everyone. There is a story, told by the Greek geographer Strabo, about a Carthaginian captain who noticed that a Greek ship was following him to the Tin Islands. The captain deliberately ran his ship aground, destroying both the cargo and the vessel, just so as not to reveal the route. Carthage compensated him for all his losses, because the secret was worth more than the ship. Tyrian purple was another monopoly. The dye, which was extracted from murex sea snails, was so expensive that purple clothing became a symbol of royal power. It took about 10,000 snails to produce 1 gram of dye. The Carthaginians controlled the murex trade along the entire African coast, and they set prices that could bankrupt entire states. But here's the interesting thing. The Carthaginians didn't just extract purple dye. They invented a technique for fixing it to fabric that prevented the color from fading in the sun or washing out in the sea. This process involved soaking the fabric in a urine solution, heating it, and repeatedly dipping it in dye. It sounds unappetizing, but the result was so durable that the purple fabrics from Carthaginian tombs have retained their color to this day. Chapter 6. The First Punic War. Theft of Blueprints. When Rome wanted to gain access to the Sicilian Straits, it faced a problem. It had no fleet, none whatsoever. Rome was a land power, excellent at building roads and legions, but the sea was a foreign element. And then something happened that still seems almost comical. But it changed the fate of the world. A Carthaginian ship was washed ashore in Calabria, a quinquireme, a 5-row rowing ship, the most advanced warship of its time. The Romans dismantled it completely. They recorded every mark on the planks, every angle of the beams, every size of the frames. They did not understand the meaning of the Phoenician symbols on the parts, but they copied them all, every single one. The first Roman fleet was built according to Carthaginian designs. 120 ships in 60 days. This in itself was an engineering feat. But the Romans understood that copying the ship was not enough. They had to know how to fight with it. And then they invented the corvus, an boarding bridge with an iron spike at the end, which pierced the deck of the enemy ship and firmly connected the two vessels. The naval battle turned into a land battle, and in land combat, the Roman legionnaire had no equal. The Carthaginians were shocked. Their fleet, which had been invincible for centuries, suddenly began to lose. Not because the Romans became better sailors, but because they changed the rules of the game. They took Carthaginian technology, added Roman tactics to it, and created something new. This begs the question, who is stronger? The one who invented the technology, or the one who wasn't afraid to steal it and use it in war? History seems to know the answer, but you won't like it. Chapter 7. Hannibal, engineer of war. After its defeat in the First Punic War, Carthage lost Sicily and Sardinia, but it did not break. Instead, it did what all great engineers do after failure. It rethought the problem. Hamilcar Barca, Hannibal's father, led an army to Spain, not to conquer, to build. In 20 years, the Carthaginians created a new economic base in Spain. The silver mines of Cartagena yielded so much metal that Carthage not only paid war reparations to Rome, but also accumulated resources for a new war. Hannibal grew up in these mines and on these construction sites. He saw how his father managed thousands of people, how roads were built through mountains, how bridges were built across rivers. For him, war was not an art, but an engineering task. When Hannibal decided to cross the Alps, everyone around him said it was impossible. 38 elephants, 38,000 infantrymen, 8,000 horsemen, across mountain passes, where winter temperatures dropped to -20 degrees. But Hannibal was not a madman. He was an engineer. He had scouted the route several months before the march. He knew which sections could bear the weight of the column and which would not. He knew where the ice could be broken with cold vinegar, by pouring it into cracks in the rocks and using the sudden cooling to widen the cracks. He knew how to distribute people on narrow paths, so as not to cause an avalanche. The elephants were ferried across rivers on rafts, but not just any rafts. They were specially designed pontoons covered with earth and grass so that the animals would not feel the water under their feet. The elephants walked on them, thinking they were walking on the shore. It was not bravery. It was psychology, applied as an engineering tool. In the Alps, the army encountered an icy cliff, blocking their path. Hannibal ordered huge fires to be lit right on the ice. When the stone was heated, vinegar was poured on it. The sudden change in temperature split the rock. The soldiers cleared the debris by hand. The passage was opened in a single night. This is not a legend. It is a description by Titus Livius, who, of course, may have exaggerated. But the chemical principle, thermal expansion and contraction of stone, is absolutely real. And it was used in mountain engineering for thousands of years after Hannibal. Chapter 8. Cannae, the algorithm of destruction. The Battle of Cannae in 216 BC. It was not just a victory. It was a mathematical masterpiece. The Roman army numbered 86,000 men. The Carthaginian army numbered about 50,000. Rome had numerical superiority. According to all the laws of warfare at that time, Rome should have won. Hannibal lined up his troops in an arc, with the convex side facing the enemy. The infantry stood in the center, deliberately weak. On the flanks, the best cavalry. The Romans struck the center and began to push through. The Carthaginian infantry retreated, slowly, in an orderly fashion. The Romans pressed harder. Closing ranks. They sensed victory. But the arc turned into a cauldron. The cavalry on the flanks attacked from both sides. The center stopped retreating. The Roman army was surrounded on all sides, squeezed so tightly that the soldiers could not raise their swords. They died, not from wounds, but from suffocation in the crowd of their own comrades. About 70,000 Romans died in one day. That's more than the United States lost in the entire Pacific theater during World War II in one day. Military academies still study Cannae to this day. The German Schlieffen Plan in World War I, Operation Bagration in the Great Patriotic War, Operation Desert Storm, all contain elements of Hannibal's tactics. Double envelopment, the cauldron, an algorithm, written in 216 BC, and still relevant today. Chapter 9. Why Hannibal did not take Rome. After Cannae, Rome was exposed. Hannibal was within a few days' march of the city. His officer Maharbal told him, "In 5 days, you will be dining on the capital. Go ahead. I will go with the cavalry, and Rome will learn of your arrival before it learns of your departure from camp." Hannibal refused. Why? Historians have been arguing about this for 2,000 years. Some say he didn't have siege equipment. Others say he was waiting for political allies in Italy. Still others say Carthage refused to send him reinforcements. But there is another version. Hannibal understood that taking Rome and destroying Rome were two different tasks. He could enter the city, but he could not destroy the Roman idea. Roman legions continued to form throughout Italy, Spain, Africa, Greece. Roman interests were everywhere. Destroying Rome meant fighting endlessly. Hannibal wanted peace on his terms, not destruction. That was his mistake, or his wisdom, depending on how you look at it. Maharbal said to him then words that went down in history. You know how to win, Hannibal. You don't know how to use victory. Chapter 10. Scipio, the enemy's student Rome, responded to Hannibal with Hannibal. Publius Cornelius Scipio, a young general who lost his father and uncle in the war with Carthage, did what the best engineers do. He studied the enemy's system and improved it. Scipio spent years analyzing Hannibal's tactics. He understood the principle of double envelopment. He understood how Carthaginian cavalry used speed. And he created a new Roman tactic that was a hybrid of Carthaginian maneuverability and Roman discipline. In the Battle of Zama in 202 BC, Scipio used Hannibal's own method against him. He opened gaps in his ranks so that the Carthaginian elephants could pass through the formation without breaking it. The elephants, Carthage's main psychological weapon, proved useless. Scipio's cavalry flanked them. The trap was sprung. Hannibal lost, not because he was worse, but because his student proved himself worthy of his teacher. After Zama, Carthage was humiliated, but not destroyed. It was forbidden to have a fleet. It was obliged to pay huge reparations. But the city continued to live. And, most surprisingly, continued to prosper. Chapter 11. The economic miracle of a defeated city. Here's a paradox that is rarely mentioned in textbooks. After its defeat in the Second Punic War, Carthage paid all its reparations to Rome ahead of schedule, in 10 years instead of 50. When the Carthaginian ambassadors came to the Roman Senate with the final payment, they offered to pay the remaining 40 years of debt immediately. The senators were shocked. They expected to see a ruined city, begging for a reprieve. Instead, they were faced with representatives of an economy that had recovered faster than anyone could have imagined. How? The Carthaginians reoriented themselves. Without a fleet, without an army, without colonies, they focused on what they were best at in the world: trade and agricultural engineering. They turned their agricultural base into a wealth-producing machine. Olive groves, vineyards, grain fields. Everything worked like clockwork. It was precisely this prosperity that truly frightened Rome. Cato the Elder, a Roman senator, visited Carthage and returned to pale. He began to end every speech he made in the Senate with the same phrase, regardless of the topic under discussion. Carthage must be destroyed. Carthago delenda est. Not because Carthage threatened Rome militarily, but because it prospered. Because a rich Carthage, sooner or later, would become a powerful Carthage again. And Rome knew it. Chapter 12. The Third Punic War. Murder without cause. The Third Punic War was not a war. It was an execution. Carthage did not attack Rome. Carthage did not threaten Rome. Carthage simply existed and prospered. That was enough. Rome issued an ultimatum: surrender all weapons. The Carthaginians surrendered. Rome demanded hostages, children from noble families. The Carthaginians gave them up. Rome demanded one last thing: leave the city. Move deep into Africa, far from the sea. It was a demand that the Carthaginians could not meet, not because they did not want to, but because without the sea, without a harbor, without trade routes, Carthage would cease to be Carthage. It was a demand for suicide. And then the city decided to fight. Without an army, without a navy, without allies. 3 years of siege. This is what happened inside the besieged city. The Carthaginians melted down their gold jewelry to obtain metal for weapons. Women cut their hair to weave bowstrings for catapults. This is not a metaphor. It is a documented fact. Human hair, long enough and twisted into a rope, has elasticity, comparable to tendons. And Carthaginian engineers knew this. For 3 years of siege, without outside help, the besieged city produced weapons, built barricades, and repelled attacks by one of the best armies in the world. That in itself was an engineering feat. Chapter 13, a controversial point. The myth of salt. Now, let's talk about something you've probably heard before, and something that's probably a myth. Since childhood, we have been told that after the destruction of Carthage, the Romans covered the ground with salt so that nothing would grow there, ever. A beautiful symbol, a dramatic image, final destruction. But there's a problem. No Roman source from that time, neither Polybius, nor Appian, nor Titus Livius, mentions salt at all. The first mention of this story appears in the 19th century, in the work of an American historian, who, apparently, simply invented a beautiful detail. Archaeologists have examined the soil at the site of ancient Carthage. There are no signs of mass salinization. The soil is normal, fertile. Olives grow on it, just as they did 3,000 years ago. Was this true or not? It is one of those myths that we repeat without thinking, because they are beautiful, because they end the story with the intonation we need. What do you think? Does history need a beautiful lie to convey the truth about cruelty? Or is the truth itself scary enough? Write in the comments. I want to hear different versions. Chapter 14. Fire, the end of the machine. When the city fell, they say, the flames burned for 17 days. 17 days, until everything that could burn had burned. Imagine this scene. The circular military harbor, built by generations of engineers, reflects the fire in its perfectly calm waters. 220 slipways, each a masterpiece of standardization, burn one after another. The wooden guides, along which the ships glided, turned to charcoal. The bronze capstans that lifted the ships out of the water melted and flowed over the stone. Scipio Aemilianus, the Roman commander, stood on a hill and looked at the burning city, and he wept. His advisor, Polybius, who was standing next to him, asked him why he was crying. After all, it was a victory. Scipio replied that he was thinking about the fate of cities, that one day someone would stand on a hill and watch Rome burn and weep too. This is not a legend. It was recorded by Polybius, who was there, one of Rome's greatest generals. At the moment of his greatest victory, thought about the finiteness of everything. Even Rome. Chapter 15. The Return. Because geography is stronger than politics, 100 years passed. Rome looked at the empty space where Carthage once stood and realized what any engineer would have realized. The location was perfect, not because of the people, because of the geography. Julius Caesar was the first to propose rebuilding Carthage. he was killed before he could begin. But the idea remained. Augustus, the first Roman emperor, founded a new city on the site of Carthage. Colonia Julia Carthago, Roman Carthage. And this new city, built on the bones of the old, once again became one of the largest cities in the world. Its population reached 300,000. Aqueducts were built here, which still stand today. Amphitheaters, thermal baths, libraries. The Romans built a 132-kilometer-long aqueduct, which supplied water from the Atlas Mountains directly to the city. It was one of the longest aqueducts in the ancient world, and they built it because Carthaginian engineers had already solved the problem of water supply in this place. The Romans simply scaled up the solution. Good engineering solutions. No one destroys forever. They come back, sometimes under a different name. Chapter 16. Legacy. What we took from Carthage disappeared, but its ideas dissolved into civilization, like salt in water, everywhere, and nowhere in particular. Modular shipbuilding, invented by the Phoenicians, became the basis for all subsequent shipbuilding. The principle of standardized, interchangeable parts, which we consider an invention of the Industrial Revolution, was implemented in Carthaginian shipyards 2,000 years before Whitney and his cotton gin. The alphabet, which the Phoenicians created for accounting, became the basis of Greek writing. Greek writing became the basis for Latin. Latin became the basis for all European alphabets. Every letter that you are reading now bears the mark of a Phoenician merchant who wanted to quickly record the number of amphoras in the hold. Magon's agronomic works, translated by the Romans, influenced Mediterranean agriculture for 1,000 years to come. The principles of crop rotation, which he described, were rediscovered by European agronomists in the 18th century, and once again proved revolutionary. Double-entry bookkeeping, attributed to Italian bankers of the Renaissance, had its prototype in Carthaginian trade records. The idea of remote control, through documents, through standardized records, is a Carthaginian invention. Conclusion: the eternal shadow Rome defeated Carthage. That is a fact, but look at what remains. Rome took Carthage's ships and built a fleet. Rome took Carthage's agricultural knowledge and fed an empire. Rome took Carthage's accounting system and managed provinces thousands of kilometers away. Rome took Carthage's place and built a new great city on it. Carthage lost the war, but it won civilization. Its shadow lies over everything we call Western culture, over our alphabet, over our principles of trade, over our understanding of what standardization and logistics are, over our idea that a city should stand where roads converge. The Phoenicians believed that knowledge is more important than power, that a blueprint is more important than a sword, that a system is more important than a hero. History seems to have proven them right, just 2,000 years too late. If this story has made you see the ancient world as alive, moving, full of ideas and inventions, I would be delighted to have you subscribe. Your attention allows us to discover such stories together, again and again. In the next video, we will travel to another civilization, whose ideas were as boldly ahead of their time as those of Carthage. Stay with us.